This hour, the audience will have a chance to ask their questions to Florida Senator Marco Rubio and Dr. Ben Carson. We begin with Senator Rubio, who last night finished second in the Nevada caucuses behind Donald Trump. But his message today, the majority of GOP voters still don't want Trump as their nominee. Joining me now by satellite, Senator Marco Rubio. Senator, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great to see you. So you believe still that the majority of voters don't want Donald Trump, but at this point in this contest, you have yet to win a single race. With the understanding that past is prologue, what are you going to change to get a different result?
Well, first of all, I'll admit he's the front runner and that I'm certainly an underdog, but I've been an underdog my entire life. I mean, from where I grew up and how I grew up to how I came to the Senate running against the Republican establishment to this race, when I've been hit by over $40 million of negative ads by establishment money. But I relish that. This is a country of underdogs. This is a nation made up of people who scratch and claw to move ahead and improve their lives. And this is an important election. We are not going to allow the conservative movement to be defined by a nominee who isn't a conservative. And we certainly need to elect someone who's prepared to be president in a thoughtful and serious and important way, given the threats this country faces. So that's why a majority of Republican voters are not supporting Donald Trump. And obviously, once this race begins to narrow a little bit, you'll see more of that support consolidating. But right now, we're kind of in this situation that we're facing, and we're going to keep working hard and picking up as many delegates as we can.
But I didn't hear anything in there that talked about a change. And the question is whether you like being second, because if you don't change anything, what are the odds that number is going to start changing for you?
Well, we're not going to change our message. I mean, this is why I'm running. I'm running because I understand we have real challenges. I know that people are angry. That's why I ran for Senate in 2010. Well, I mean, our tactics are the following. Every state is different. Obviously, we want to go in with the resources we have and try to move numbers and do that. So our tactics are not going to dramatically change. I think the biggest change in this campaign is going to be when the people not named Donald Trump, the choices begin to narrow and we start to give the Republican voters a clearer choice of who they want to get behind. And look, my argument is I'm as conservative as anyone running in this race. I hold up my record of 15 years of turning conservative ideas into conservative solutions up against anyone who's running. But I can win. I can unify this party. I can grow this party, and I will win this election. The Democrats desperately do not want to run against me. That's why they attack me more than anyone else in this race. And if we lose, then that means Bernie Sanders, who's a socialist, or Hillary Clinton, who's under FBI investigation, becomes the next president of the United States. So it's going to take a little longer than people want, but I feel good about it, and I can tell you no one's going to outwork us. That's for sure.
All right, let's get some voters in here because we want to hear from them directly. This next issue is getting a lot of attention in the Democratic race. It's a hot item with young Republican voters as well. And the question comes from Tanya Sue Maestas. She's here with her mom, Lydia, and she describes herself as undecided. She says she's narrowed it down, however, and she wants to ask about the cost of college today. Tanya, what's your question for Senator Rubio?
Good evening. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here tonight. Senator, I'm a current student and the first in my family to be furthering my education. My question for you is what you would do to provide more opportunities for students to further their education while making it affordable and decreasing the student debt that's crushing our America's youth.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya, for the question. That's an important one. I'm actually the only Republican running that always talks about student loan debt in every one of my speeches. I actually have a plan to deal with all of it. And one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it is because 4 years ago, when I became a U.S. Senator, until 2012, I still had over $100,000 in student loan debt from my time in law school and undergraduate. So we have a comprehensive way to deal with it. And the first is we're going to provide students more information. Before you take out a loan, when I'm president, you're going to know how much people make when they graduate from the school you're going to with a degree that you're seeking, so you can make an informed decision about whether it's worth borrowing thousands of dollars for a degree that may not lead to a job. Second, we're going to provide alternative ways to pick up college credit without having to pay for sitting in a classroom. In the 21st century, whether it's through Coursera or Udacity or other alternatively accredited methods, you should be allowed to acquire a substantial number of credits without having to pay for it. It'll shorten the amount of time you're in school, but it's also going to open the door for higher education for non-traditional students. The third is we would make income-based repayment the automatic method of repayment. I think that I'd much rather collect $20 a month from someone than to have them default and then ruin their credit and be unable to buy a home or start a business or whatever. And the fourth thing that we want to do in the mix is provide an alternative to student loans. It's called the Student Investment Plan, and it would allow students, especially graduate students, to go to a private investment group and get them to pay for your tuition instead of a loan. If you make a lot of money, they're going to make their money back, like if they invested it in a small business that was successful. If you don't make a lot of money, they lose their investment. They made a bad investment. But it's better than a loan because it doesn't sit on your credit report, and all the risk is on the investment group. So we have developed this strategy, and because I feel passionately about it, because I can tell you, that when Jeanette and I were first married,
they wrapped you for me.
Yeah.
They wrapped you for me because we had to get on to our next question.
All right.
But thank you for that. I want to get to our next questioner, who's Kerry Kessner, another one of the small business owners that we're hearing from tonight. Now, as a businessman, he says that he has a number of concerns, but one in particular is an especially big deal for him. Kerry, tell us what your question is.
Hey, Marco, thank you so much for taking time to listen to us and answer our questions. As a small business owner, we have a number of concerns: taxes, excess regulation, and health insurance. As a small business, we have a tough time affording health insurance for our employees. Don't think that's fair, but the health system is currently broken. What are you, as president, going to do to fix the broken healthcare system? We need more than repealing Obamacare or breaking state lines.
Right. And I agree with that. First of all, we are going to repeal Obamacare, and we're going to replace it. I don't want to go back to the old system. That wasn't working well either. A substantial number of Americans were uninsured. By the way, I'm the only one running for president that's ever done anything about Obamacare. I got rid of the bailout fund that they were going to use with your taxpayer money to bail out private insurance companies, and I led the effort to do that. So part of it is allowing everyone to control their own health care spending. Under my plan, you would be allowed to provide to your employees, if you can't find insurance, you'd be allowed to provide them medical money. In essence, the equivalent of what you're paying on their behalf. They would be able to receive that money. It can only be used for medical care, but it would be tax-free. It wouldn't be treated as income. And they would be able to use it to fund health insurance any way they want, whether it's a health savings account, whether it's a combination of a health savings account and buying insurance of the kind they want from any company in America. You would also be allowed to pool your resources with other similarly situated businesses to create a coverage group. So again, it would give you more options. So what I want to do is provide more choices, because that'll lead to more competition in the health insurance marketplace. And it is through competition that you're going to get better coverage, lower prices, and better networks. And that's a much better approach than what we have now, where the cost of the healthcare exchanges, where the companies are losing money, it's all being passed to the commercial plans, and that's why your premiums keep going up.
Very good. Senator, thank you. Well, the issue of prison reform is starting to bubble up on the campaign trail as well on both sides of the aisle. And as an interesting point of reference, it is one issue where the Obama administration and the very conservative Koch brothers find themselves not only in agreement, but working together. You got President Obama, Van Jones, and Charles Koch all agreeing on some issue. I mean, the same issue. It's like your head is going to explode, but it's happening. So our next question comes from Jake Blumenkrantz, and he's a young student at Baylor University. We have a few Baylor visitors here tonight. Welcome, Jake, and your question.
Thank you. My question is about prison reform. Currently, there are several bills in the House and Senate co-signed by Democrats and Republicans alike, all trying to fix the issue of mass incarceration. What would you do with a united front as president to solve this issue?
Well, first of all, thanks for the question. It can be an important issue, but I think it's largely misunderstood. First of all, federal crimes, for the most part, the vast majority of people are not in jail for some small thing. In fact, the growth in incarceration in this country has largely been through mandatory minimum sentences for violent offenders. Up until much of the 1980s, we had huge crime rates in America. And then minimum mandatories began to kick in around the 90s. And suddenly, you saw that people that were once quickly released returned back to the streets and were committing crimes. Much of the crime in America was being committed by recidivists, people that were going back to crime. Now these people were being locked up, and suddenly you saw a dramatic plunge in crime rates. So that's where the bulk and the majority of people being incarcerated are. And I'm not going to undo that. I believe in minimum mandatory sentences for people that are violent and dangerous criminals, for drug dealers and people like that. Now, I am open to saying let's divert people out of the system if they're first-time offenders and they're not a danger to society. I believe that is especially important for juveniles and young people who have made a bad mistake or did something dumb, and you don't want them interacting with the criminal justice system, because that stigma oftentimes leads to criminalization later on. The vast majority of people that commit drug offenses as users are victims. They're addicted to or dependent on a substance. I don't want to see them in jail either. I'm open to that. But when it comes to violent and dangerous criminals and drug dealers, I support minimum mandatory sentences because it has worked in reducing the crime rate in America over the last 25 years.
All right, we're going to have much more with Senator Rubio on the opposite side of this break coming up in a moment because, well, yes, okay, so stand by. We're going to have much more right here from Houston, Texas. And welcome back, everybody. It's a special 2-hour edition of the Kelly File, face-to-face with the candidates. On the stage with us now, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, or at least via remote. Thank you, Senator Rubio, for being back with us. I want to get right to this next issue. Former President George W. Bush said one of the toughest issues he struggled with as a president had to do with stem cell research, an issue on which he first used his presidential veto. And our next question on this issue comes from Sarah Gubala, who's a science professor at Lamar University. She says she likes both Governor Kasich and you, sir. Sarah, what's your question for the senator?
Senator Rubio, you've been criticized by Right to Rise as being too pro-life to be president. What are your positions on stem cell research? As president, will you veto legislation that could help save a life at the cost of someone else's life?
Well, first of all, I don't view it as that kind of choice. I view it a couple things. Number one, there's all kinds of stem cell research going on, including on umbilical cord blood and things of this nature. I support all of that. What I do not support is anything that would lead to the creation of an industry where you are creating embryos solely for the purpose of cultivating stem cells, because I am pro-life. I believe that all human life is worthy of the protection of our laws. I recognize it's a difficult issue. It largely comes up in the context of abortion. This is a hard issue. I get it. It puts two competing rights against each other, the right to choose what you do with your body combined with the right of an unborn child to live. And I have to make a choice. When these two things are in conflict, which side am I going to be on? And I've chosen the side of life. Again, it's not a political issue for me. It's a human rights issue. I believe deeply that all human life is worthy of the protection of our laws, and I believe that if human life loses its protection or its dignity in our laws, we're a society headed in the wrong direction fast. And so that's my view. I feel passionately and deeply about it. I understand and respect Americans that have a different view on it, and I certainly believe we can continue to make advances on stem cell research without creating an industry where embryos are being cultivated simply for purposes of accessing stem cells.
So cord blood, fine, but embryo research, absolutely not. Is that your position, Senator?
Yeah, especially embryos that are created solely for that purpose. Yes, absolutely.
What about discarded embryos from IVF procedures and such?
That's a harder issue, obviously. But again, I think that the problem with that is it's very difficult to, what's hard about policing that is anyone can claim that they're going to be discarded already, so they're really not for purposes of life. I'm very concerned about the industry. I'm just very worried about an industry being created that
No, I understood. But just to clarify on the abortion issue, because you and I talked about this at the very first presidential debate back in August. You state now that you're against abortion, even in the cases of rape or incest. Is that your position tonight?
Yeah, what I said, I don't require those exceptions in order to support a law. On the other hand, I have supported laws that have those exceptions because I'm interested in saving lives. I support the 20-week abortion ban, and it has those exceptions because that's where the majority of Americans are. If I'm president, even though I don't personally require there to be exemptions for those two things, I will support a law that has them because I am interested in saving as many lives as we can.
Understood. Okay, our next voter came here tonight hoping to put her question to Donald Trump. Since he could not be here, we have asked her to put the question to you, sir, and it concerns an issue that has incited a lot of emotion on the campaign trail. And with that, we turn it over to Allison Young, who has a story and a question. Allison?
Thank you. Senator Rubio, recently a Muslim American Army reservist was denied access to a recreational gun range in Oklahoma, and the range even had signage saying it was a Muslim-free facility. What is your opinion on this, and do you think the rhetoric of this campaign season, especially the anti-Muslim rhetoric, has increased this sentiment?
Yeah, the story you just told me is wrong. It's immoral. We should not be doing that to people. The bottom line is there are millions of patriotic Muslim Americans. And if you go to a national cemetery where we bury veterans who have died in the service of our country, you'll see stars of David and you'll see crosses, but you'll also see crescent moons. You will see Muslim Americans who have died in the service of this country. And so our issue is not with patriotic Muslim Americans. It's not even with Islam. It is with radical jihadists. It is with radical Islam, which is a politicization and a radical ideology that threatens Islam. It doesn't just threaten the West, it threatens Islam. If you look at ISIS, ISIS wants to kill all Shia and all Sunnis who do not agree with their own version of Islam. So we recognize the contributions that Muslim Americans make in this country, and no one should be discriminated against in America because of their religion or their faith. I also think we have to recognize, and I think the Muslim American community does, that radical Islam poses a threat.
But what did you make of her question about whether the rhetoric in this campaign is putting some Muslims in this position? You know, Muslim Americans who are worried about their sons and their daughters walking in the streets, going to gun ranges and so on.
And that's important, Megyn, because when you're president of the United States, you have an enormous megaphone. You get to set the agenda and the tone for the country. We already have a president that's incredibly divisive. We should not be pitting and dividing Americans against each other. And I agree that I think we are capable of recognizing the threat of radical Islam without having to demonize an entire religion, especially those Americans here that are so loyal to America, and many whom are willing to don the uniform and die on behalf of our freedoms and our liberties.
All right, we're going to get on to our next question, which is on the plan announced by President Obama on Tuesday to close the U.S. military prison in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The president is proposing to transfer Gitmo's most dangerous terrorist detainees to a facility inside the United States. Carolyn Gibbs, what's your question for the senator?
Senator Rubio, President Obama this week announced that he wanted to close Gitmo. Would you close Gitmo, and if so, what would become of the facility, and how would you transfer these hardened war criminals to the U.S. soil without them having U.S. civil rights?
Yeah, a couple points. It's a great question. Number one is Gitmo is not just a prison for radical terrorists. It is also an important naval facility, and we're keeping it. Number two, we shouldn't be transferring people out of there. A substantial number of them, once released, are rejoining the battlefield against us. In fact, this week, Spanish police arrested a former Gitmo detainee who was plotting terrorism. Number three, when I am president, we're actually going to be taking people there, not taking people out. When I'm president, we are going to have a real war on terror, which means our armed forces will destroy them. And if we capture any of these terrorists alive, we're taking them to Guantanamo. And that's where they belong. They are enemy combatants in a war against America. They should not be released so they can rejoin the battle against us.
All right, let me follow up on that with you, Senator, though. What about interrogation of terrorists who we capture on the battlefield? Because back during the Bush administration, they didn't necessarily go to Gitmo. They went to CIA black sites, and they were subjected in some cases, some limited cases, to enhanced interrogation techniques. So what would a President Rubio administration do when we capture a dangerous terrorist who we want to interrogate?
Well, first of all, I never talk about interrogation techniques because it gives the terrorists the opportunity to train to evade them. Number two, let me say this, though. I believe we are capable we have the capability of gathering information without having to do some of the things that people feel offended by. And number three, interrogating a terrorist is not the same as a law enforcement interrogation. In a law enforcement interrogation, you're trying to acquire evidence to use at trial. In a terrorism interrogation, you are trying to acquire information to prevent a terrorist attack in the future. And so you can't always use the exact same tactics, because this is not about evidence to put someone in jail. This is about evidence and information to prevent a future terrorist attack.
Now, we selected this next voter because her issue has been the issue for a lot of Republican voters throughout this primary cycle, and it concerns the decision between supporting the person you like and supporting the person you think can win. And this next question comes from Michelle Marquette. Michelle, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Megyn, and thank you, Senator Rubio. I'm struggling right now with my decision on who to vote for because Senator Cruz shares similar values as me, but I think you're more electable. What would you say to a voter like myself when comparing electability to values?
Well, first I would say you don't have to compromise those when you vote for me. I have a 15-year record of turning conservative ideas into action. I encourage you to look at my record.
Forgive me for the interruption. Forgive me for the interruption. Please pardon me. But, Michelle, is there something specific about Senator Rubio versus Senator Cruz that is giving you pause?
One thing I really like about Senator Cruz is his idea of limited government, and sometimes the policies that Senator Rubio, he puts out there, I don't necessarily believe they line up with what I believe is limited government.
Go ahead, Senator Rubio.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have, as I said, a record of limiting government. I haven't just talked about it. I did it. I was in the state legislature in Florida, which is a part-time job, but I was the Speaker of the House. We balanced the budget the 2 years I was Speaker without raising taxes. In fact, we cut taxes. We actually reformed the school curriculum without Common Core. We did it at the state level where it belongs. At the federal level, I've outlined clear ideas about how limiting government. I have a regulatory budget proposal which would dramatically reduce regulations. That shrinks agencies. But I believe I am the conservative that can unite this party. I'm as conservative as anyone. I encourage you to examine my voting record in Washington. It's right up there with anyone in Washington. But I believe I can unite this party, as I've proven this week with more and more people coming on board, but I can also grow it. I believe that I give us the opportunity to take conservatism to people that haven't voted for us in the past, and instead of watering down our principles, convincing them that our principles are the right way forward for them and for our country. That's not just how we win an election. That's how we create a better future for America.
Senator, I've got one final question for you. Same one I've been asking the other candidates, and that is today Governor Mitt Romney suggested that the GOP voters should not choose a nominee until they have seen the tax returns of said nominees. Will you release yours? When and how many years?
Yes, I think, in fact, we were planning today, tomorrow, in the next few days. Number two, a lot of my tax returns are already out there because I released them during my Senate campaign. A lot of the information that's contained in them is already public because of my Senate financial disclosures every year. But I'll release them. They're not very complicated. They're just not very exotic, but we will release them, sure.
The exotic tax return. We should all be so lucky. Senator, great to see you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.